Scaramucci.
Mooch!
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to give it a few seconds for everybody to populate here. I have to give Harry Galarkian credit because I've been doing for Family Office Insights deal flow webinars since the COVID shutdown. And he said to me, he wrote Moneyball Medicine, really good guy. Also, if any of you invested in his fund, he had shares of Royalty Pharma in it. So if you didn't, shame on you. Anyway, so Harry said, why don't you start something called the Luminary series? So I did, and Anthony Scaramucci is joining us today as one of our luminaries. And I'll have Anthony validate this, but we met in the Bermuda, maybe 17 years ago, and so we've been friends ever since. So keeping tabs on his activities, and not many people keep tabs on mine, but he has. So anyway, we're so glad to have Anthony here, and we're just going to have a very casual conversation. We'll go anywhere that Anthony wants, and I have some ideas, and you're certainly welcome to put some questions in the chat box or raise your hand in the Q&A. And thank you for joining us today and sharing with us the only thing you don't have more of, and that's your time. So the first thing I'd like to ask Anthony is this time that we're in, and these are my words, so you don't have to agree with them, but in business and entrepreneurship and life is, if you can be resilient and adjust, because life is a series of adjustments, then you're well served. Can we talk a little bit about how you've done that and what you see in the future for not just SkyBridge and you, but how others can adjust to the changes and unprecedented things we're seeing now?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for including me, inviting me in, and I'll take any and all questions. And we did meet at the Hamilton Princess Hotel in Bermuda in 2005. You had a great memory, and I adore what you're doing and love your career, and I'm glad we're still friends. Here's what I would say. Everything about my life, and maybe other people will feel the same way, but everything about my life has been in a series of expectation management. And so, and I try to tell my kids this, I have 5 kids. If you have this expectation that you're entitled to something and the world owes you something, well, then you know what? You're always going to be set up for disappointment, because you're going to move the goalposts on the world, and the world's going to always owe you a little bit more. But if you're coming into it and you're recognizing that a lot of our lives are providential, a lot of our lives are based on luck. Nobody that we're zooming into today picked their family members. They didn't pick their parents, the location of their birth, their ethnic origin, the color of their skin. I mean, I am, the color of my hair totally changed that. You're going all natural. But I'm just like, I can't change my eye color. I mean, maybe I could put in those fake contacts, but I can change the color of my hair. But I can't change my origination on planet Earth. And so if you step back and you strip everything down and say life is unfair, John Kennedy once said that to a news journalist. He was copying it from George Bernard Shaw. Life is unfair. And if you stop and say that, okay, life is unfair, but you know what? Everybody on this Zoom call won the lottery. I don't care how much money is in your bank. I don't care what you're doing for a living. You were likely born in the United States or a Western country where you have internet access, or you're born into an affluent Eastern country that's providing you with some base services and base education and an opportunity to individuate, to create some kind of arc of your own personal experience. And so I would say three things to people. Number one, get your expectations right about planet Earth. Start in the morning with a lot of gratitude. What are you happy about? What are the things in your life that are going well? If your family's healthy in a time like this of a global pandemic, my God, you should be joyous about that. And so come from that position first. And then the second position is about anxiety and how we deal with anxiety. And I'll say this quickly, but it's an ancient quote from Lao Tzu. He's an Eastern philosopher in the tradition of Confucius. Yeah. And Lao Tzu said once, if I think too much about my past, then I have obviously made mistakes, because we can't be perfect in our past. The search for a perfect past is impossible. So if I think too much about my past, I'll be filled with regret about decisions that I made that didn't go my way, a result of which I will have some level of depression. If I think too much about my future, well, the future is unpredictable, and I don't know if I'm going to make the right decisions any better in the future than I made in the past. And so then I'll be filled with anxiety. And so what happens right now in a situation like this, where the market's gyrating, the economy is uncertain, we've got a critical election coming up with its level of its anxiety as well. There's some racial strife in the country that's bubbling to the surface. It creates anxiety because we're worried about our future. We don't know where it's going. But so what did Lao Tzu say? He said, live in the present. Be present. Wake up today. Enjoy the cup of coffee. Enjoy the fact that I'm going to talk to my old friend Arthur on a Zoom call. Recognize that there's certain joy in just the process of living and the process of the small things. And if you do that, what ends up happening, you start thinking clearly, and you get your anchoring down, and you start feeling very confident about where you as an individual are going. And then we can worry about the society as well, but you'll start to feel better, and your compass will start to point directionally to your true north. So those are some of the things I say to my kids and my staff. And by the way, if you're having a bad day out there, I want you to picture my ass getting fired from the White House 3 years ago. Okay, yeah, July 31st, okay? I'm ejected from the White House after 11 days. Sometimes I say 954,000 seconds, Arthur, because it makes me feel better.
Yeah, sounds good.
I'm ejected from the White House, blown into Pennsylvania Avenue like an Austin Powers villain. And then I'm roundly humiliated by all of the international media.
The mooch has no regrets, baby.
And then my son, who's a bit of a wise ass, he's 27 now. He just graduated from Stanford Business School. He put a 14-minute compendium together of every late night comedian in the United States that roasted me.
Surprised you only lasted 11 days on the job. Hell no.
I think we should package that up.
Yeah, I mean, so if you're having a bad day, I've said to him, AJ, how much do I have to pay you to make sure this doesn't get on YouTube? I mean, it's actually very funny. But my point is, if you're having a bad day, what do you think about that day? That was a pretty bad day. Okay?
Yeah, be grateful.
My point is, you can dust yourself off if you have your health and you have your family. And even if something's going wrong in your life, if there's a divorce or a separation or whatever, you have yourself and your love of yourself, and not narcissistic love, but just hey, I'm going to be okay, and feel good about yourself, you'll get through things. So
Yeah.
if you're having a bad day, think about that day. That was a rough day, man.
That's a rough day for sure. There are a few people that have had a day like that. If I can offer two things, I have 3 adult children. Anthony knows 2 of them. But the thing I say to them is, one of the things you said when they say that's not fair, I said, get used to it. Life is not fair. And then not to get too metaphysical about it, but the Buddhist had a really good way of looking at things is if something happens, you look at it, examine it, and then let it go. I mean, you can't tell somebody to do that, but if they get in a habit of doing that, then the time wasting that is associated with anxiety and depression and worrying about things can be used for something else. And you have to try it. You have to try it. It may not work for everybody.
Right.
And then the other thing is when you think about it in terms of you releasing the power to a problem to make your life worse, then you're giving that thing power. So I'm not going to give it power, right? And
well, you and I are totally in sync philosophically, but you also have to remember we're primordial beings. We're both sitting in a 100,000-year-old piece of machinery that really hasn't evolved in 100,000 years, and so we have. I mean, if it had evolved, none of us would be getting fat, right? I mean, so we're still wired into that whole caveman thing from 50,000 years ago. And so what comes up is worry. What comes up is potential depression and anxiety, which actually were really good defense mechanisms.
Yeah, the fight or flight kicks in.
Exactly, prior to civilization. So the Buddhists are trying to tell you to do something transcendental. They're trying to tell you to convert your atavistic inklings, your instincts, your primordial instincts, and do something transcendental and get yourself to a more sublime position. That's very hard, Arthur. I'm not sitting here with any level of righteousness or any level of sanctimony. I'm not saying I've done that. All I'm saying is I'm trying it. I'm trying to do that. When I got clocked in March with our performance, trust me, I was on my knees. Okay, when I got hit at the White House, I was on my knees. I mean, what are you going to do? You get up off your knees,
get back on the horse,
and you take one step at a time. But somebody said to me, "Well, your business got hit. You were down 25%, so you lost a quarter of a business that you built over 15 years." Okay, yeah. So that happens. That happens. A hurricane sweeps into town, knocks over somebody's life possessions, and what do they have? They have themselves. And they have their own personal dignity, and they have their abilities, and if they have their attitude, they're grateful that they got the other 75%. Let's go make it work. We can do this. And it's that can-doism that can become very infectious. And so, for me, I've always said this to people, it's really about the journey. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood, in a middle-class family. I would never dishonor my parents by telling you I grew up poor. We had a Schwinn bicycle. I was fighting with my brother over it. We shared the same bedroom. We carried the air conditioners, put them into the windows on Memorial Day. We took them out on Labor Day. You know the whole thing. Yeah. Macaroni. You probably had moussaka. We were eating lasagna. I mean, and we were beating the hell out of each other. Okay. And my parents weren't educated. They didn't go to college. But what they wanted for us, though, was to go to college and try to have some aspirational arc of the American dream. So out of respect for them, I did the stuff that they wanted me to do. I got my first job. I got fired from my first job. I mean, John Kelly's not the first person to fire me, and probably won't be the last person. But I had to I got fired from Goldman. Then I got rehired into Goldman. This is one of my better stories. So I'm fired from Goldman 18 months into it. We're in a recession. I get rehired into the sales area out of investment banking. Personnel calls me and says, "Oh, that $11,000 severance check that we sent you, let me give you good news. You're never going to have to tell anybody. You're going to be on a Zoom call in a pandemic.
Right. And you're going to tell everybody.
You're never going to have to tell anybody you got fired. But you know what? We're going to mark you down as an intercompany transfer, but we need the $11,000
back."
I said, I need the money, man. I'm paying off my school debt. My point is, I survived that. Survived the 90 bear market, survived the 94 David Askin situation, survived the long-term capital management, the dot-com bubble, 9/11, GFC. You're going to have things in your life. There's no way, if you are idealizing your life, and I did that at 25. I was coming out of law school, Arthur. I wrote down everything that was going to happen to me. I had it going up in a 45-degree angle. Everything was going to be beautiful, but that's not what happens in your life. You know, God's laughing while you're planning, and your life is going to have vagaries. And so it's your attitude is going to drive the outcome, and it's going to drive how you feel about yourself.
Look, if one of the things that I learned, and we can move on, but if you're not settled with yourself, you can't help anybody else. So the first thing to do is settle with yourself. And what you said just now is, I'm saying a few things and I don't have it fixed, but I just keep on trying, right? Try it on, see how it fits.
100%. That's right? True for everything. You know, it's true. It's even true for your character. You know, you have things in your life. Sometimes you do something that you regret. What are you going to do? Yeah. You know, you got to let it go. And now your character's building again today. You're going to try to do the right thing today. You know, I made some mistakes in the White House. I got fired. I never once blamed anybody. I didn't blame the president. I didn't blame John Kelly. Why'd you get fired? Well, I made a mistake. It was a fireable offense. I'm accountable for my mistake. But then the second day after that, you have to drop it. You know, I forgave myself. You don't want to live with the millstone of regret on your neck holding you down. You got to forgive yourself. You got to move on.
Yeah, it's too much friction.
And the last thing on this topic, don't give yourself the luxury of chronic worry. Because what do I mean by that? Chronic worry is easy. It's part of your biological design. You need to be more transformative than that. You need to be more mentally disciplined than that. You need to take it to a transcendental spot where you can be present with yourself and your loved ones, and don't give yourself the luxury of that chronic worry. That is also a hard thing to do, by the way. I'm not saying I do that all the time well, but I am practicing that every day.
Yeah.
So you're a lot cheaper than my therapist, man. We should probably let this go on for another 2 hours.
We can work on this. In fact, I have the rates are for you very, very cheap. So one last thing on that, and I'm just saying that for this. When I was 17 years old, I got my mantra and started doing transcendental meditation. And I've been doing it ever since, but not in the sense of sitting down every day and having a quiet space because I've been doing it so long. I'm on the subway and I'm out. Boom. So I would say that look, it's not for everybody, but it's really made a contribution to my life. I can point to it directly. So
yeah, a lot of people, I don't meditate, but a lot of people do. And maybe at some point I should, you know, I'm Italian.
Should's a really bad word. Should's a bad word.
I know that. I mean, my thing is like one of the best lines ever. Kenny's probably going to be mad at me for bringing this up, but I'm with Ken Langone, who some of the people on this chat room know. He's the founder of Home Depot, one of the more successful Italian Americans, and he's one of my role models and mentors. And I'm interviewing him at the Pierre Hotel, and he just wrote a book called I Love Capitalism, and we're having this very interesting discussion. I turned to him, I say, Kenny, all this great philanthropy, NYU Medical School, paying for the kids to go for free. He's got all these charities going for people. I said, you're going to go straight to heaven after this. And he looks at me and goes, I'm not going to heaven. I'll be lucky if I make it to purgatory. I look at him, I said, what are you talking about? He goes, I have so much hate in my heart for Elliot Spitzer. There's no chance they're going to let me in. There's no chance they're going to let me in. And it was so brilliantly Southern Italian, yeah. Arthur. Okay? That's right. It just captured me, and it tickled my funny bone because, come on, we're going to be in the fight. Let's fight it out, you know.
Totally.
And I thought it was a great line, you know. Yeah. And it's definitely not a Buddhist doesn't say that. Trust me.
No, for sure. All right, we have one question here, and then we'll move on to another topic. And by the way, folks, please feel free to put some questions in the chat box. We'll get to as many as we can. So there's a question from Brenda. Do you think sustainable investing will start to be factored in by corporations, or will budget constraints keep them on the back burner?
So I think that's the central question. So I honestly don't know the answer. I can only give you my intuition about what's happening in our culture right now. I think there's going to be a large swath of corporations that put that on the front burner, irrespective of cost, and they're going to want to make that part of their cultural mantra. They're going to want to make sure that they're part of the future, and the future looks sustainable and the future looks cleaner. this is a bit of a digression, Arthur. I want to bring this up because it's apropos for what we're going through right now. I get invited to speak. I'm blown from the White House. It's a month or two later. I'm fired in July. It's the first weekend in October. It's parent-teacher weekend at Washington and Lee University, one of our oldest universities. The land was given by the Washington family and the Lee family. And I'm in the cathedral speaking to the parents and the students. And somebody raises their hand and says, there's a portrait of Robert E. Lee behind you, and there's one of George Washington. And so they were slave owners, and they were racist. And so should we drop the names from the school, and should we pull down the portraits? Remember, this is 2017, not 2020.
Not just yesterday,
right? So I then say to them, okay, let me just ask everybody, we're getting to know each other here, we're getting a little close here, there's 1,000 people in the room. I said, raise your hand if you've ever been in a automobile. Raise your hand if you've ever flown in an aircraft, commercial, private, or otherwise. People, I said, okay, so listen, you're coking up the environment, okay? I can prove it to you scientifically. You're destroying the earth. We dug up these fossil fuels. We started in 1850. We created this great industrialization. We made our lifestyles better, but we're choking off the earth. And so someday we're going to have sustainable energy. Someday we're going to have renewable energy. We're going to have energy from the sun. And let's say it's 1850 to 2150. It's a 300-year period of time that the forward world is going to call the dirty period of our modernization, where we took the stuff out of the ground and we burnt it into the atmosphere. And then they're going to take the statues down of you. You will have done something great in your life, but those people from 400 years from now are going to say, that guy is no good. That guy was part of the earth. They almost destroyed the environment. And so what we do is we judge people through our prism, our reality, and our moralism of today. Okay, and guess what's going to happen to the people that are living right now? They're going to get judged the same way 300 or 400 years in the future. I'm not saying what happened 400 years ago was right or moral or anything like that, but it did happen. And so if we're going to pretend that it didn't happen, or we're going to try to rectify it through our sanctimony today, I think we're making a mistake. And one of the popes said this, I can't remember which one. They asked him about the emperors. Said, well, Pape, there are all these emperor statues here in Rome. They're pagans. Why, and they were rapists and all kinds of bad things. He said, well, look, it's part of our history. My point is, we're sometimes getting into the wrong fights, but we're talking about sustainable energy. I'm telling you, we're going to get there. We're going to get there as a civilization. And some of the things that are happening today are waking people up to what we're doing right now and how we need to change. And so the forward-thinking leaders, the ones with vision, will say, okay, I got to focus on the bottom line, but I also have to focus on the long-term bottom line. And so I want to be a part of that. And so that's my opinion. It's a long-winded answer, but I wanted to throw in the culture war while we were talking about it.
Yeah. So, you know, Washington and Lee did, in fact, give the property to the university. So you can't undo that fact either, right?
Well, no, you can't undo that fact. And so now it's interesting. The Washington Post is calling on Washington and Lee to drop their name, but are you going to drop the name Washington from the Washington Post? I'm just asking, is that what we're doing? I mean, I'm not saying that these men were pure, and I'm not saying that these men were perfect, but I think we're looking at them through a prism. I'm going to say something here. We'll probably get people to shut off the Zoom. In the 5,000 or 6,000 years of our civilization, we have had bondage. We've had slavery. We've had it in all walks of life, in all forms of the civilization. It doesn't make it right. And it was an original sin and an original stain in our country. But it is a historical reality of what happened over 5,000 years. The Greeks were fighting with each other. Euripides wrote about it. Slaves were taken from the vanquished group of people. Same with the Romans, same with every other civilization. So I'm not justifying it at all. Of course, we have to make our societies better and fairer and safer, and there needs to be social justice. But I think by taking a fire hose to all of that, I don't think that's the answer. I think there's a lot to be learned from it. as opposed to erasing it. That's just my point on that.
Yep, I think there's a lot of progress being made, and it's a sensitive issue for a lot of people. And I would argue
somebody's asking me about Christopher Columbus. So Christopher Columbus is Christopher Columbus is a sore spot for me because I'm an Italian American. I'm a member of the Columbus Citizens Foundation, and so I learned about Christopher Columbus as an icon to the Italian American community. And you have to remember two things about the Italian American community. Maybe it happened in your community. Well, we weren't allowed to work when we got here. The sign said Nina, no Italians need apply. In 1904, Teddy Roosevelt, my grandfather used to always go off on this. He wrote signed legislation that Italians were to be treated as non-white, whatever that means. Okay, that we were supposed to be treated that way, non-Caucasian, I think he said, and for purposes of immigration. So we learned that Christopher Columbus was this sort of icon of our lives. So we're sensitive about Christopher Columbus because of the way Native Americans view Christopher Columbus. So I don't feel as strongly about it today as I did 10 or 15 years ago. And I'm open to the debate about Columbus and Washington and all of these other people. But I think we should say, okay, he did this right, he did that wrong. I don't think we need to be ripping the statues down. That's my honest opinion. Some people get mad at me for saying it, and that's my opinion.
I think it's a controversial point, and controversy is also often, begats discussion, and that's what we're doing here. And well,
Brian just agreed with me, right? So I got one guy. Thank you, Brian. I'm just giving you my opinion.
I happen to know Brian, and so we'll be interested to know that his comment. He's a Harvard boy too, by the way. So anyway, the shout out to Eunice from Brazil, by the way, and thank you for everybody for being on. My friend Greg Hill has a question. What's on your wish list for you and the U.S. for 2020, which is a big question, but go ahead and see what you can do with that one.
Well, I mean, what's on my wish list for me, I guess, I'm a parent, so there's a shout out to all the parents out there. We worry. I got 5 kids. And so what's on my wish list is, if there's never been a cliche that has been more true, is that you're only as happy as your least happy kid, right, Arthur? I mean, you know that. And so my wish list for me is that my kids are happy and safe and healthy. That's my wish list. Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. So that's me. For our country, it's a different sort of a wish list, actually. I think the country is at a very interesting inflection point. And I think what's at issue for the country right now is, where are we going? Are we going to bring it together? Where are we going? There's a aging baby boomer population that's going to leave the leadership stage shortly. And the demographics of the country have changed, and it's become a different mixture of people. But we're all still welded to the ideals and the idea of America. And so, are we going to have transformative leadership? Are we going to have, we're talking about Buddhism, are we going to have a transcendental leadership? Are we going to have a post-partisan leadership where we're less focused on the left-leaning answer or the right-leaning answer, but what is right or wrong for the society? That's my hope for America. I'm hoping that the fever breaks and people recognize, okay, hold on, we have so much in common. We have so many great things. We have so many great natural resources in the country. And yes, there's been racial injustice, and we have to make it fair. How are we going to go about doing that? Rather than me sitting in my tribe and another group sitting in their tribe and fighting it out, how are we going to weld ourselves together? And so my hope for the country, because this really does come from leadership, we have to get leaders in the public service positions to think and act like that. And so that's my hope for the country. And I'm not a cynical person. I've seen a lot of different things. I've learned a lot from my experiences in politics. I got an 11-day PhD in Washington scumbaggery. Trust me, I was very eye-opening. But I'm a believer that we can do this, because I know underneath all of this tension and anxiety, there's a commonality among all of us. And so we just have to find that kind of leadership. That's what I hope for the country.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that we can get some. Look, the politician rhetoric is all about getting elected. And so oftentimes when somebody threatens to do something good or bad, then you don't really know what's going to happen, because the reality of the situation is that changes when you just don't know what's going to change to once they're in office.
Right, of course.
Having said that, what's the old saying? The U.S. is the worst country except for all the others. Right. So what do we got?
Yes, but I think, look, I'm an American exceptionalist. I love our country. I believe in American exceptionalism. But, we also have to embrace that we may not have the best practices on all fronts. I would argue that we haven't demonstrated American exceptionalism in handling the pandemic, because the pandemic required a fact-based, science-based analysis of what to do and an examination of Eastern Asian countries that were successful at handling MERS and SARS. And so we didn't adopt those practices, as a result of which, and this is a great irony, in order to get the economy restarted, we started too early. And so we've ironically slowed down the economy. Whereas if we had been more patient, and I think this is one of the things we have to tell ourselves, right? Arthur, do you remember the marshmallow test? You know what that is?
No.
So you can Google it, but it was a group of Stanford psychologists in the 60s. They took some kids and they brought them into a room and they said, okay, here's the deal. You can have a marshmallow.
Yes, I remember part of it, but continue.
Or you can have it right now, instant gratification, or tell you what, I got to go run an errand. I'm going to be back in 5 minutes. You can have 2 marshmallows. And what they learned, they studied these kids over 10 years. What they learned is the people that could delay the gratification, they ended up dealing with their anxiety better. They ended up dealing with the tumult of life better. But the ones that couldn't, they ended up having more problems. They kept stepping into things that were worse for them because of the impetuosity and the lack of discipline. And the
spirit of lack. So they're
exactly.
Spirit of lack, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so the point was that the marshmallow test was a necessary mechanism to understand how to delay gratification and to train yourself to be in that delay. And we didn't do that. We didn't have leadership in the country said, okay, time out, guys. This is the best thing that works. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we can do it. And boom. And we're going to do it this way. And it's going to take 6 months. And I know you don't want to hear that, but I'm telling you, if we take 6 months, we'll be out of this thing in 6 months. The case count will be low. We will have burnt out the virus. But we didn't do that, because we didn't make it a facts-based, scientific-based analysis. There's some discussion about the debt coming on the chat room.
Yeah.
You want me to answer some of those questions? How do we? Someone said on the chat room, how do we pay off the debt? And the other person said, well, we're not going to pay off the debt. And so they're both sort of right. Okay, meaning not both sort of. How do you pay off the debt? The debt is totally pay offable. I'm being George W. Bush. I'm making up words. Okay. Why is the debt pay offable? Well, we're issuing the currency. The debt is denominated in our currency. So tonight, the Treasury could press 2 buttons with the Federal Reserve and print $23.5 trillion, and boom, the debt's paid off. Boom, paid off. Right. And if you don't believe me, read Stephanie Kelton's book called The Deficit Myth. She's a modern monetary theorist, and she doesn't care about the debt, not worried about the debt, and she believes you can just run the debt into the moon. The flip, so you can pay the debt off. Boom, that's how you can pay it off. Now, I'm not a modern monetary theorist. I've studied the economy for 31 years. I got trained as an economist at Tufts. I think the problem with that analysis is that when you do that, you ultimately are eroding the currency and you're eroding the purchasing power of the currency. And so wealthy individuals are protected from that because they own assets. Their assets go up in value with the inflation, but middle class and lower middle class people, they lose their living standards. They can't catch up. And some of that, frankly, happened after the 2008 crisis. The great irony is the Federal Reserve policies created the Bernie Sanders and the Donald Trump movements because you had all of this economic anxiety born from the last crisis. And we're using the same playbook this time. So we're going to even have more trouble ahead if we don't come up with a more stable 4 corners plan of infrastructure, education, jobs training, et cetera. But on the debt, 28% of the United States is owned by the United States, 28%. And so if you look underneath the ground of the land that's owned by the United States, we have about $60 trillion of assets. Okay, that's anything from iron ore to uranium to oil and shale and coal. And so you have a $23 trillion debt, and you've got a balance sheet that has 60 or so trillion dollars of assets that can offset that. And then you have the full taxing power of the United States. So I'm telling you, as an economist, it's not a modern monetary theorist, don't overly worry about the debt. It is quite manageable. What we have to be worried about is growth and evening out the opportunity set for the American people. Because if we can do that, then you can create these economic arcs of aspiration where a poor kid or a blue collar kid growing up in a certain area is like, okay, I got a shot. You know, it's like what he said in the Hamilton musical, I want the shot, I'll take the shot, give me the shot. And so what's happened is we've so fractured and made our public educational system so uneven that people don't feel like they have that shot anymore. You know, so I'm not a socialist that believes in equal outcomes, but I am a pragmatist that believes in creating a platform of equal opportunity. You know, because I didn't pick my parents, and some kid didn't pick his parents, and he maybe didn't pick the neighborhood he's in. We have to be responsible to that kid. We have to say, okay, here, we're going to give you a package of goods and services to help you get ahead so that you have this shot. And if we do that, we're going to heal our society because it'll calm people down. People will feel like, wow, I've got skin in the game and I've got this equity opportunity to go forward. Somebody's asking about reparations. Can I answer that one? Do you mind?
You can answer. Go ahead. Yeah, for sure.
All right. So there's a lot of harsh feelings about reparations. So people say, well, it built the off the backs of slaves. We built this great economic engine. As we were going into the Industrial Revolution, all that economic rent went to white people and white institutions, and the blacks were left out of that, or the African Americans were left out of that. And so now we need to pay them back. And there's another group of people, wait a minute, my family got here in 1923. We had nothing to do with that. Why am I paying for that? Okay. And I understand that debate, but we need to move off of that debate. And we need to make it about a different type of saying. It shouldn't be quote unquote reparations, but it might be repairing. It might be, okay, we have a rich society and we have a poor society, and we want to have a really good government that helps the society. I'll speak for myself. I do not want to live in a barbed wired security perimeter inside my McMansion, driving around in a Rolls Royce while my fellow neighbors are suffering and struggling. I don't want that. I would rather live in a smaller house where I know the people around me are doing well enough where they don't want to come at me with a pitchfork and a tiki torch. That's me. Okay. And somebody's from Brazil, and we know there's great economic disparity in South America, and that in itself creates a lot of anxiety. So I would say stop with the reparations. Let's talk about a war on poverty. And I'm going to recommend a book to everybody. Amity Shlaes wrote a book called The Great Society, which examined the war on poverty. Her stipulation in the book, we spent $13 trillion on the war on poverty, and poverty won. We lost the war on poverty. And I think she's making an interesting point in the book. We have to attack it from a different angle. We have to come at it with a package of goods and services and a platform of security as it relates to health and education. And so then now all of a sudden you've taught the person how to fish, and now they can go on and create. So whether they're black or white or brown or gray or green, it's about repairing the society, and it's less about specific racial reparations. Okay, that's what I would say.
Yeah, so
to
I think
that topic. And so yes, they need help. It needs to be repaired, but it can't be a color-based thing. It has to be a income and poverty-based thing, in my opinion.
Okay, healing and repairing, and I'll just use what I've always admired in Germany, where the education's there, and there's a stipend while you're being educated.
Right,
so you
right.
come
And
out of
they've
that,
done a way better job. The Germans have done a way better job during the crisis. They said, okay, no problem. The government's funding.
Yeah.
What are you making? I make X. Okay, great. Up until 100,000 euro, we're going to pay you 80% of X until the goddamn crisis is over. and all of a sudden the unemployment looks fine and everybody's calm and they're not coming after each other. We're not thinking about it properly because no one's thinking anymore. We're just trying to kill each other.
Yeah. So I've got a couple things we might want to touch on here. Let me just get, well, we got a lot of questions here. Okay. Strategies surrounding infrastructure and investment bonds, our current low interest rates, can we talk about that?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, listen, I'm in structured credit for those reasons. I said 10 years ago during the crisis, we're going to be in a low interest rate environment. And so where are you going to get higher yield and possibly more kick with some predictable cash flow and stability would be in structured credit. It's a little bit more confusing, a little bit more complex. The problem with structured credit, because it's tied to the consumer, when you have price hits or price shocks, you got to hold in there. We got hit in 2008. We went down 20%. I begged people to stay. Those that listened to me, we went up 60% because there's going to be a little bit more volatility in structured credit. We're down 20. I told our low number was March 31st. We were down 24. I said, okay, please calm down. Now we're up 9. We're down 17 on the year, and we're on the way back. But if you look at the structured credit over a continuum and you're willing to accept a little bit of that volatility, and really there's only been volatility twice in 12 years, you're going to get a high single-digit rate of return with reasonably low risk. I'm not going to tell you not to have money in stocks or other types of instruments, but that's where I have almost all of my money except my real estate. Why? Because I'm not trying to be the richest person in the graveyard. If I can get a 7% return, Arthur, I can double my money every 10 or so years, and my family will be very happy. They'll have a lot of financial independence, and I don't have to overly worry. I was at a country club in Wayzata. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Minnesota. It's a beautiful lakefront town, summer resort town for Minneapolis. And I was up there giving a speech, and this old lady is raising her hand. She's in the back of the room, and she says, "Mr. Scaramucci." I said, "Yes." She says, you were a financial advisor at Goldman Sachs. I read your bio. I said, "Yes." She says, "Okay, well, what's your advice to me? What's your advice to wealthy people? What is your advice? Forget about these other FAs. I want your advice." I said, "Well, I have it down to 2 words." I said, "Do you want to hear the 2 words?" She said, "Yes." Stay wealthy.
Right.
Stay
wealthy. Rich money, right? Yeah.
Relax. You don't have to be the unicorn chaser. You don't have to own it. There's no holy grail. There's no holy grail. There's no instrument that yings when the other one's yanging. Everything in a crisis correlates to one. But if you have this very stable and sturdy, diversified portfolio and you have discipline to ride it through market cycles, you're going to stay wealthy.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be selling in the middle of a crisis. You don't want the musical chairs to stop on the worst day. And oh, by the way, we get through these crises. It always looks horrific. It's terrible. There's been, I can't even name the number of plagues going back to the time of Christ, and the Justinian plague and the bubonic plague and the Black Plague and the Spanish flu pandemic. And guys, what happened after the Spanish flu pandemic? 750,000 Americans dead, 60 million people killed globally. We went into the roaring 20s. We had one of the most explosive technological periods of growth in human history. So my point to people is relax, stay wealthy, and you got very low interest rates. Structured credit, you can get a little bit more. I would be careful in certain stocks because you and I have seen this movie before. My old boss, Lee Cooperman, always reminds me of the Nifty 50. If Amazon's trading at 127 times earnings, you have it priced into 2350. Okay, maybe that's going to work. I don't know. Maybe, what could happen is the fundamentals on Amazon continue to go up, but you get multiple compression on the stock. It trades at 50 times earnings, which is a rich price, and you lost half your money, even though the company's doing well. Yeah. Does that make sense? I mean, so to me,
no, you totally look.
Round out your portfolio, stay wealthy, buy into panics when other people are setting their hair on fire. I'm laughing. I got Merrill Lynch as one of my clients. They put a sell on my fund right at the inflection point, right at the bottom. I'm like, okay, everybody is a long-term investor until they have short-term losses. When they have short-term losses, they strike a match, they set their hair on fire, and they run around in a circle. Why are you doing that? Calm down and look at it over a continuum.
Anthony, I have the advantage in my life, and I'm grateful for it, that I can say whatever I want, and I don't care what people think. And I saw that, and that was optics. And I know it hurts, and it was unpleasant, but that was optics.
Fine. It is what it is. You know, what am I going to do? I mean, not knocking me out of business. I mean, it's fine. Do what you want. I'm out there raising money in Japan, replacing the money that you're taking. Do what you guys want. But I mean, it just doesn't make any sense if you're thinking about it in a well-rounded way. But that's my opinion.
So my good friend Pete Thurlow, the world's best IP attorney, is out on the call, and so there's a big pitch for Pete. He is a really amazing human being as well. So Pete, there you go. He's asking a question about discussing the China-U.S. trade matters, theft of IP, challenges in Hong Kong, and overall relationship with China. And he thanks us both.
You know, it's a very complicated question, so I don't want to oversimplify it. What I want to tell you is that they have their own opinion culturally, like everybody else has an opinion culturally. Well, how do they feel? They feel like the Anglo-Saxons came into their area of the world. They had this beautiful middle kingdom, right? That's the intersection between earth and heaven. The Chinese view themselves as better than earth, the middle kingdom. The Anglo-Saxons come in and they destroy the civilization with the Opium Wars. And so what ends up happening is you go from 1830, where you have 30% of the world's GDP, to 1965, where you have 1.5% of the world's GDP. And then the light bulb goes off after Mao dies that we're going to make it back, and we're going to go back. And so what they decide to do is they get very aggressive with the rest of the world. And so the rest of the world's allowing them to do that because they want rising standards of living. What we know, Dean Atkinson said this, George Marshall said this, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower said this after the war. We want rising middle-class standards of living around the world will reduce conflict, right? That was the post-World War II architecture. So we're embracing China in 1972, and we're bringing them into the family of nations, and they're ripping us off, and they're stealing our intellectual property, and they have certain rules in China that are restrictive, and we're allowing them to do that because we want them to rise. And then they hit that compounding inflection point where now they're competing. And our leadership, and this is something that the president is actually right on, you know, some of you may hate him, some of you may love him. I don't love him or hate him. I want to be objective about him. What he's right on, I don't think he's done it stylistically the right way, but he's right on. We allowed them, without any hand checking from our public policy people, to rise and take advantage of IP and take advantage of intellectual property transfer and theft and things like that. And we did it on our watch, and we didn't need to do it that way. They're still in the WTO with all of these emerging market benefits, and they're the second largest economy, or per capita now they're the largest economy. So it's very complicated. So here's what I would say to you. We have to figure out a bilateral relationship with them. The bellicosity of rhetoric, the rise of nationalism, that has never worked historically. And so even if we're sore at them and we're competitive with them and we're worried about them, we've got to be careful. And so I didn't answer the question 100%. I don't like what they're doing. We have to hand check them, and we have to push them back on those things. But I'm going to recommend a book to everybody on this call. Read Destined for War by Dean Allison. He's the dean. Sorry, it's Graham Allison, but I call him Dean Allison. He's the dean of the Kennedy School of Government. And he wrote a book 2 years ago about the Thucydides trap. You're Greek, so you know the whole ancient Thucydides. The Spartans were threatened by Athens. Athens was a rising superpower. They decided to go to war. They thought the war was going to last 10 minutes. It lasted 30 years, and it destroyed both civilizations. So the Peloponnesian War, that book by Thucydides, is a cautionary tale about going after your adversary. And so we've had 16 episodic events in the last 2,000 years where a rising superpower has threatened an existing power. In 12 of those 16 times, we've gone to war. And so Graham Allison, he's basically saying, let's calm things down. We don't want to do that with China. There's too much greatness at stake exponentially for the growth of abundance for mankind if we can figure out a way to work these things
Coexist.
out. But I'm sorry?
Coexist.
We have to do it. We have to do it, whether we like it or not.
So we need to get to this eventually. So let's do it. Can you predict the likely outcome of the general election in November?
Don't be mad at me. Trump is going to get his ass kicked in. He's going to get destroyed. And I'm not saying that because I'm talking my book, because I've had enough of the guy. But I would stipulate to everybody on this call, if we were on the board of a publicly traded company and we had a choice between two people and it was a search committee, we said, all right, we're going to go with this person versus that person. We only have two people we can search from. We get the person to be our CEO and they act like this. Come on, guys. You'd be like, okay, that's enough of that. Okay, that's enough. Okay, so, look, is Joe Biden the best guy, the perfect answer? Who is? But not this guy. Okay, this guy is consequentially damaging to the United States. And if you don't believe me, read chapter 8 of John Bolton's book. I call that the orange jumpsuit chapter. He should be in an orange jumpsuit after what Bolton said. And then read Mary Trump's book. I got an advanced copy of it. It's coming out next week. Read those two books, take a chill, turn off Fox News, and relax and say, is this going well for the country with this lunatic? Is it going well? It is not going well. Okay, we can do a lot better than this. Got to go. And by the way, the data supports that. And if, don't believe the polls and blah, blah, blah. No. Believe these polls. They've changed the methodology on these polls. And the two polls that you should really be looking at are the sentiment one. One is women over the age of 50, no mas for Trump. Okay, there's a 26% gender gap. And then the second poll is, are you strongly for or strongly against? The president is at 21% strongly for, and he's at 50%, I won't vote for him if you're peeling my skin and rolling me in salt. Okay, those are very hard numbers to overcome. So yes, he is going to get his ass kicked.
All right, so there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it here. All right, so we have a bunch of others. Let's see if we can talk about this. Where are you on whether we're going to see some bank failures? There's two questions that are related to that.
Good question. Probably not quickly. They just deregulated more aspects of Dodd-Frank and added some elements back to the Volcker rule. So banks are super tight. They probably over-regulated those banks, and so not that quickly. And banks have been successful recently, smaller banks, in issuing equity and preferred shares. So I don't think that's going to happen this time. When I look at the banking industry and the stress test and read the Federal Reserve beige book, I don't see the banks failing here. I see retail under a tremendous amount of pressure. I see suburban strip malls and shopping centers under a tremendous amount of pressure. And the banks will have to take some write-downs related to those loans, but I see the banks sort of holding in there. And remember, the discount window's open, and they're able to borrow at zero from the Federal Reserve. And so they're in way better shape here than they were 12 years ago. So there will be some, but it won't come as quickly as people had originally anticipated.
So here's one for you, Anthony. Will you consider to run for the New York City mayoral race in 2021? You have the best shot due to your name recognition and your moderate stance on policy. So there you go, is an editorial with the question.
All I got to tell everybody is
I'm Chloe's son, by the way. I'll give her a heads up.
It's a very flattering thing to say. I'm running for re-election in my marriage. Okay, that's all I'm really running for. And unfortunately for me, I'm probably like on a one-day term, and I don't even know if there's term limits or not. So,
one-day renewal, right?
all I know is after you've been tabloided in the New York Post, which I have been, and on the front page with the dunce caps and everything, and my wife and I 3 years ago almost got divorced, and there was a lot going on personally, professionally, and politically, and so on and so forth. And praise the Lord, we managed to reconcile our marriage and keep our family together, and thank God, knock on wood, we're in a stronger position today than we've ever been. I'm probably not that interested in going into politics today. Having said that, I live on Long Island, so I don't live in the city. So you have to be a resident of the city. And so I'm a little bit like Billy Joel. This is where I'm living and this is where I am. Having said that, could I seek a political office someday in my life if I thought it was the right thing for me and my family? I'm open to it, to be candid. I'm not a politician, so I'm not going to say, oh, I'm never running for office, or I'm never going to do this or never going to do that, and then I go do it 10 minutes later, right? Elizabeth Warren, she said 3 months before she filed, of course I'm not running for president in 2020. And then 3 months later, she filed. I mean, this is what people don't like about politicians, Yeah.
Well, we have a follow-up question on the bank debt. Haven't they suspended capital reserve requirements, and now isn't that really scary in general? And what about all the risk in the derivatives market tied to these banks?
No, you're right. Who's ever asking that question is right. You've studied the thing, Buffett says that's the weapon of mass destruction. There's a lot of things that could collide into each other. Gold. Yeah, but let me say this to you though, and I think you'll get this right away. The Fed is, whatever's going to happen, the Fed is going to hit it with a water wall of money. We can have the deficit debate. We can have all of the debates about, are we out of control? But the Fed doesn't care. They're going to electronically print the money to bail out that situation, meet those derivative payments, take care of that bank. Now, that doesn't mean that the equity of those banks that you're talking about are going to be there. That could dematerialize, but it's not going to crush the financial system. The Fed is on watch. The Fed is moving 4 times faster, deploying 3.5 times more money than they did in the 2008 crisis. The 2008 crisis was literally a dress rehearsal for this disaster. Yeah. So whoever said that question, and you said it was Peter, what I would say to you, Peter, is yes, there is elements of risk there. So, lighten up on your financial securities exposure, but the Fed will be to the rescue on those risks quite quickly, is my opinion. So I don't see that as a systemic failure.
Yeah, good answer. It was Daniel Gold, by the way.
Daniel, sorry.
So now that this is from our friend Mark Jarrett from the UK. Now that Trump has been in office 3 years and 171 days, it's a joke. Do you have a MAGA hat? I didn't get to the rest.
Do I have an MAG? Do I have an MAG hat? I actually have a lot of them. Okay, if you're nice to me and you really like Trump, I have like signed ones that my wife wanted to throw gasoline on, but I think I have them somewhere in the house. So.
Who exactly signed them?
No, he signed them. He's got that cardiac arrest signature. He's trying to give the rest of us an EKG that looks like his signature, right? This guy, man.
And he's doing it.
This guy's tutte pazzi, man. If there are Italians on the call, you know exactly what I mean. Your grandmother would look at him and say, tutte pazzi.
Yeah.
I mean, you've never seen crazy like this guy until you really get up close to what he's like. And by the way, you didn't ask me this, but I'm going to say it. It's October 2019. There's a person in my office, I'm not going to name who it was, senior cabinet official, very senior, well-recognized name, sitting in my office. Not in the administration anymore. The problem here is he can't manage anything. He doesn't know how to delegate or manage, and he's too insecure to take input from experts. So let me tell you something. Thank God we don't have a crisis. Because if we get a crisis, he's immobilized the executive branch. And so we're going to go into a disaster. And I thought, and this seems like 500 years ago now, but I thought the Soleimani strike was going to cause it. Right? That was January, guys, only 6 months ago. I was like, oh my God, this is the crisis that so-and-so was talking about. But it wasn't that, it was the pandemic. Because you can't lie about the pandemic. You can't tell the American people 2 + 2 = 7 and fake science, look at the cameras, fake science. You can't do that. People looking at their hands and say, wait a minute, 2 + 2, that's 4. It's not 7. What are you talking about? And it's been so grossly mishandled. And I love Sean Hannity. He's one of my best friends, but he's like the Dorothy Hamill of mental figure skating. He's doing pirouettes and he's figure eights. He's trying to justify everything this guy's doing. Come on, guy. The guy's nuts. Yeah. You can't justify what he's doing.
Yeah.
And you got to be a man or a woman of principle and stand up to the guy. Okay. If you really love the country, and if you're a Republican on this phone, we got to fix the Republican Party. I'm a Republican. If you don't open you're going to have the Republican Party for the Fox News viewers that are buying catheters and CPAP devices off the Fox News advertising. Come on. You got to widen the demographic base of that party, and you have to invite more people into that party if you want that party to be competitive over the next 25 years. You can't do this.
Yeah, it's a mess.
I didn't know we were going to talk politics. I'm sorry.
No, we could talk.
It's a passionate part of my life. So, I mean, and by the way, I got investors that are mad at me. I'm taking my money because you like Trump. Okay, take your money. Oh, you don't like Trump. I'm taking my money because you don't like Trump. Okay, take your money. What do you want me to do?
Yeah,
I'm going to give you my opinion because I love my country. I've lived a good portion of the American dream. My parents loved the country. My grandparents probably loved the country more than anybody. Okay, and I love my country. I'm going to speak my mind.
Yeah, Anthony, we have the same thing. I was born here. My parents were born here, so it's a little different. But we've had the Greek-Italian thing ever since we've known each other, and I give enormous credit to the nerve.
Have Brian Bird. He says Trump wins on the chat. I'm watching the chat. Give Brian my contact information. Yeah. Let's either have a gentleman's bet or he can pick the number. We'll have a nice size bet on this thing.
All right.
Because it's totally different this time. It's not like, oh yeah, Trump's going to come back and there are people that are not going to vote for him and say they're not going to vote for him and blah, blah. And by the way, I would never underestimate Mr. Trump. Trust me, I was with him during the Access Hollywood fiasco. We were down 13 points in the polls, in the flash polling, and then he went on to win the election. But he's not running against Hillary Clinton this time. And there's a very colorful mosaic of people that are teaming up this time. It's a very different characteristics of the demographic voting bloc. So have Brian, who's got Trump wins over here, he can call me. We'll have a gentleman's bet.
I'll make sure it happens. I want to get to Cody's question, but before we run off, and please, you don't need to do this unless you really want to. Is there an anecdote that you can share with the Family Office Insights family that would be interesting and entertaining, or just informational as it relates to what you experienced in the White House?
All right, we'll end it on a funny note. How about we'll go with funny as opposed to anything else.
Yeah.
We don't need any more
Please
gruesome, so we'll go with funny. I mean, there was a gruesome moment. I walked out of the Oval Office and said, okay, he's really not listening, and he didn't listen to me. He's not listening to those four other people that are a lot smarter than me, and he thinks he's smarter than everybody. We're in trouble. That was an epiphany. But I'm going to tell you a funny story, okay? I'm on Air Force One. We're flying to Youngstown, Ohio, okay? And I like the president. This is not a personal. He calls me. I'm in my office. He goes, there's lots of Italians in Youngstown, Ohio. You got to get on a plane with me. We're going out to Youngstown. I said, okay, no problem. I stop everything I'm doing. You're the president. I'm getting on the plane. We get on Air Force One. We're flying to Youngstown, Ohio. And it's Tuesday, July 25th. And I'm stressed. I'm not going to lie to anybody. I mean, I've got the job for 4 days. I didn't know I was getting blown out 7 days later, but I'm stressed. And I'm a little hoarse. And I'm talking to him. We're in the cabin in the Oval, like you've probably seen it on TV, or if you've been on Air Force One, it's his office. He's got his little bomber jacket on. I'm sitting across from him, and I'm a little hoarse. He's like, you got a sore throat? No, I'm totally fine. No, I hear a little bit of hoarseness in your throat. You got a sore throat? Now he's pressing buttons on the desk, right? And all of a sudden, in comes Ronnie Jackson, the physician, the presidential, right? He comes in, he opens up the door. Yes, Mr. President, yes, something's wrong with Anthony. Go fix him. All right, so now I'm walking down the corridor in Air Force One, and we're going into the hospital bay. I never, my first time in Air Force One. Lyndon Johnson, after the Kennedy assassination, he required that all Air Force One planes designated have a hospital. The president's blood is in a refrigerator. Ronnie's a surgeon. There are 2 surgical attendants in the room. Ronnie looks at me. He says, open your mouth. So I open my mouth. He says, okay. He says, turn around. I'm like, turn around? He goes, yeah, pull down your pants. I said, pull down your pants. I said, I don't need a proctology exam right now. We're on Air Force One, okay? So, Arthur, I pulled down my pants, and now I got my butt exposed, and I'm holding on to a railing. And Ronnie gives me 2 shots in my ass, okay? One is a cortisone shot and one is penicillin. And I'm sitting there, and I just want you to picture this. You're on the plane of the most powerful person in the world, and my ass is hanging out, and I'm getting shot in the ass. And it should remind everybody, you're Greek, right? You should remind everybody of our mortality and our simplicity and who we really are, right? And I said, what did you just do? He said, well, I gave you a shot of cortisone because you got irritation in your throat. I'm not sure if you got strep throat, but what I just gave you was enough penicillin to kill a horse. So you're not going to have strep throat tomorrow morning, and you'll be okay. I said, am I contagious? He says, no. I said, well, tell the germaphobe, AKA the President of the United States, I'm not contagious. So I went back into the office with him, and we continued our conversation. So that is, I don't know if that was what you were looking for, but that was, to me, one of the more surreal stories that happened to me while I was in the White House 3 years ago.
So I would say that metaphorically it represented what was going to happen 7 days later. You had your pants down by your ankles. I'm just saying.
I did. I got hit hard.
Yes.
I got hit hard. And I think that's another lesson for everybody. Yeah. You know, it was humbling. In some ways it was humiliating. In other ways, it made me more psychologically minded about the world. But the most important thing I can say about it, you can rise.
Of course.
You can trust yourself and your character and your resiliency. And whatever's going on in your life right now, as long as, God forbid, it's not health related, you will rise. You will come out of this thing with greater perspective and a greater appreciation of what's good in your life.
That was great. So my dear friend Cody had asked a question. I want to get to it, and then we have to wrap things up.
Okay.
We share a purpose of improving outcomes for people with brain tumors, given your work with the Brain Tumor Foundation. Yes?
Yes.
I'm thinking about your earlier comments on reparations. How do you see the role of philanthropy in overcoming the obstacles to social determinants of health?
So I definitely think it's a big component of it. If you ask me about the future, I think there's going to be more social, my opinion is there'll be more social engineering in philanthropy for very smart people. So you mentioned the Brain Tumor Foundation. Why? Well, most people pick a charitable thing that's related to their families or their personal life story or something. My dad had a brain tumor. Thankfully, it was successfully operated on in 2003, and he's still with us at age 85. But it was a very scary time. They removed the tumor successfully. It turned out to be a benign tumor known as a meningioma. And then I started learning about brain tumors and how little we know about them, and more people die from them than you think. And I said, okay, I'm going to try to help this charity and raise awareness for it. But I think the future, in my opinion, so that's specific to me, I think the future for very wealthy people is going to be, okay, how do I make this better? What are we going to do from a social engineering footprint? How am I going to hand out picks and shovels? How am I going to hand out things that, fishing rods, so that I can get a very large group of people excited about what their future and what their children's future should be? And I hope that happens, frankly, in coordination with good government. But yes, I see that coming. I think that's a very important thing.
Yeah, awesome. So, Anthony, can we do this again another time?
Hey, anytime. Look, it's a pleasure for me. I appreciate you guys staying on this long. I'm in my house. You won the room raider. My wife's got me stuck in the basement here with the wallpaper that looks like fossils. I don't know what it is. You won the room raider, but I'm doing fine, and the internet works. So God bless.
Yeah,
and I appreciate you having me on.
No, it was super great. It was extraordinary. Thank you and thank you all for being here and signing in. And
my pleasure. Again, thank you, Arthur. It meant a lot to me. It's great to see you. And I bought the book that you recommended. Yeah, I'll start reading a little later. Thank you, man.
That's awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.